The wire transfer hit at 3:47 a.m. I was still in the delivery room, clutching my newborn daughter to my chest, surrounded by the sterile smell of antiseptic and the rhythmic beeping of hospital monitors. By morning, my husband and his parents had completely drained our joint savings account, every single cent I had earned over 7 years of relentless labor. But as I lay in that hospital bed, battered, exhausted, and bleeding, they forgot one non-negotiable detail. They thought they had left me with nothing, but they forgot that I held the master LLC operating license for all 6 of their fine dining restaurant locations in my name alone. By afternoon, I didn't cry, and I didn't scream. I made a single 10-minute phone call to the state licensing board and frozen their entire corporate operating account, bringing their multi-million-dollar empire to a dead halt before the dinner rush even started. Follow my story until the end to see how their greed completely destroyed them. My name is Sarah. I am 29 years old, and if there is one thing I have learned the hard way, it is that some families do not look at a daughter-in-law as a human being. They look at her as an unpaid employee with a bank account waiting to be harvested. 7 years ago, when I met my husband, Mark, his family's business, Voss Prime Hospitality *, was nothing more than a failing single-location bistro drowning in debt and terrible reviews. Mark's father, Richard Voss, was an arrogant man who ran the business like a personal playground, while his mother, Alina, treated every employee like indentured servants. Mark was a sweet-talking, passive man who lived entirely in his parents' shadow, incapable of making a single decision without seeking Alina's approval. When Mark and I started dating, I was a licensed hospitality operations manager with a degree in business administration and a sharp eye for corporate structuring. Seeing how desperate Mark was to earn his father's pride, I stepped in. I didn't just help out on weekends, I completely overhauled their entire business model. I restructured their supply chain, negotiated brand new vendor contracts, redesigned the menu, and handled every legal requirement to turn that single struggling bistro into a high-end restaurant group. Over the next 6 years, Voss Prime Hospitality exploded. We opened 6 luxury locations across the state, generating millions in revenue. Because Richard had terrible credit from a previous corporate bankruptcy, and because Mark lacked the professional certifications required by the state commercial board, I became the primary legal anchor of the entire enterprise. When we filed the paperwork for the expanding parent LLC, I insisted on holding the master commercial operating license, the health permits, and the state hospitality registrations under my name and corporate entity. At the time, Richard and Alina practically wept with gratitude. Richard held my hands at a celebratory dinner and called me the savior of the Voss family. Alina gave me a gold necklace and promised that I would always be treated like a cherished daughter. But as the money began pouring in, their gratitude slowly curdled into pure, unadulterated entitlement. Once the restaurants were self-sustaining, the tone in the Voss household shifted dramatically. Alina began making subtle, biting remarks about my background, constantly reminding everyone at family dinners that Mark had married beneath him. If I brought up operational budgets or suggested cutting down on Richard's lavish personal expenses billed directly to the business, Alina would cut me off with a wave of her manicured hand. "Sarah, dear, leave the big financial decisions to the men. You're just the manager. You should focus on making Mark happy." They conveniently chose to forget that without my license, those 6 restaurants couldn't legally serve a single glass of water, let alone a $200 steak. When I became pregnant with my daughter, the disrespect escalated into outright hostility. Alina decided that since I was going to be a mother, I should immediately step down from my corporate role and hand over full operational management to Mark's younger brother, Julian, a 30-year-old party boy who had failed out of 2 business colleges and had never held a real job in his life. When I flatly refused to sign over my management rights to Julian, the atmosphere turned toxic. Mark, rather than standing up for his pregnant wife, began pressuring me at home. "Sarah, just let my family handle it," he would whine, staring at his phone while I cooked dinner. "My mom just wants what's best for the legacy. You're going to be busy with the baby anyway. Why do you have to be so stubborn and controlling?" I realized then that Mark had never seen me as a partner. To him and his family, I was merely a tool they had used to climb out of bankruptcy, and now that they were comfortable, they wanted the tool put back in the shed. The breaking point arrived in my 9th month of pregnancy. Over my 7 years of working, I had maintained a joint high-yield savings account with Mark where we deposited our personal distributions, along with my personal investment returns. It contained $340,000, funds I had carefully saved to buy our dream home and secure our child's future. On a rainy Thursday midnight, my water broke 3 weeks early. The labor was agonizing and complicated. I was rushed into emergency triage, my blood pressure spiking dangerously as the medical team scrambled to prepare me for a difficult delivery. Mark stood in the corner of the room, frantically texting on his phone rather than holding my hand. Every time I looked up through waves of excruciating contractions, I saw him whispering into his phone in the hallway, taking frantic calls from his mother. At 3:12 a.m., after hours of brutal labor, I gave birth to my daughter, Lily. Exhausted, trembling, and hooked up to IV drips, I held my tiny baby, expecting my husband to share in the miracle of our child's birth. Instead, Mark looked nervous, packing back and forth near the foot of the bed, barely glancing at his newborn daughter. At 3:45 a.m., my phone, resting on the bedside table, chimed with an automated banking alert. I picked it up with shaking fingers, thinking it was a congratulatory message from a friend. Instead, my screen displayed a high-priority notification from my bank app. Notice: a wire transfer of $340,000 has been completed from joint checking savings, account ending in 4092, to VOSS HOLDINGS Enterprises LLC. Notice: your name has been removed from account ending in 4092 per primary account holder authorization. My stomach dropped into a fathomless pit. I stared at the numbers on the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I could barely breathe. I looked up from the screen to Mark. He was staring down at his phone, a subtle, relieved sigh escaping his lips. "Mark," I whispered, my voice raw and cracking. "What is this?" Mark froze. He didn't look me in the eye. He slowly put his phone in his pocket and cleared his throat, adjusting his jacket with a sickening attempt at composure. "It's family business, Sarah," he said, his tone devoid of any affection. "My mom and dad spoke to our estate lawyer last night while you were in triage. Given that you're focusing on the baby now, we decided it was best to consolidate our personal liquid assets into the main corporate account. Julian needs working capital to take over the new location expansion." I sat up in that hospital bed, ignoring the tearing pain in my abdomen. That was my asterisk money, Mark. That was 7 years of my life, my savings for our daughter's home. "It's *VOS money, Sarah," Mark snapped, his voice suddenly hard, the mask slipping off completely. "You only made that money because of my family's brand. My mother was right, you're way too greedy and territorial. We took your name off the joint account so you wouldn't do anything reckless while you're emotional. You don't need a personal fortune. I will provide an allowance for you and the baby once you're discharged." An allowance? While I lay in a hospital bed, recovering from bringing his child into the world, my husband and his parents had coordinated a financial heist, stripping me of my life savings and my financial independence in one swift, cowardly stroke. They genuinely believed that being trapped in a hospital bed with a newborn made me completely helpless. They thought my tears would be their victory march. But as I looked at Mark's smug, cowardly face, the overwhelming shock inside me didn't turn into weeping. It turned into cold, razor-sharp, absolute clarity. "Get out," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was colder than ice. Mark scoffed. "Sarah, don't be dramatic." "Get out of this room, Mark," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "Or I call hospital security and have you removed for harassment." He rolled his eyes, grabbed his coat, and walked toward the door. "Fine, get some sleep. My mom will be over tomorrow to collect your company laptop and keys. You need to accept that your role in the business is over." He slammed the door behind him. The room went completely silent except for the soft breathing of my sleeping daughter. I sat in the dim hospital light for 5 full minutes, feeling the burning pain of my surgical stitches and the profound emptiness of total betrayal. Then, I reached for my phone. They had spent 7 years assuming that because I was quiet, organized, and polite, I was soft. They thought that because they carried the surname Voss asterisk, they owned the air I breathed. But they had completely forgotten who actually held the keys to their kingdom. I didn't call a lawyer to cry about the money. I didn't call my mother-in-law to scream. Instead, I pulled up my private cloud drive and accessed the state commercial filings for Voss Prime Hospitality LLC asterisk. Because Richard had a history of corporate bankruptcy, the state required a primary, licensed operational guarantor to maintain active commercial compliance for all food and alcohol service. I was that guarantor. Every single health permit, every state liquor license, and every master commercial operating certificate across all 6 locations was legally tied to my personal state professional license and my individual tax identification number. More importantly, in our original corporate bylaws, which I had personally drafted 6 years ago while Richard was begging me to save his business, there was an explicit clause. The master operating license holder retains sole authority to suspend commercial operations immediately in the event of unauthorized corporate financial restructuring or breach of fiduciary trust. They thought they had stolen my money. They didn't realize they had just triggered the self-destruct button on their entire lives. At 7:00 a.m., while the hospital staff was changing shifts, I called my personal corporate attorney, a sharp, unyielding woman named Brenda Vance. I explained the situation in precise, clinical detail. Brenda didn't even hesitate. "Sarah, they just committed corporate conversion and fraudulent asset removal. If your license is attached to those locations, you have the legal right to revoke commercial authorization instantly." "Do it," I said. "Shut it all down." By 8:30 a.m., Brenda had filed an emergency revocation notice with the State Department of Health and the State Alcoholic Beverage Control Board. Because I was filing as the sole licensed guarantor citing unauthorized asset movement and fraud, the state acted with terrifying efficiency. At 11:30 a.m., the dinner prep for all 6 high-end locations was in full swing. Deliveries were arriving, staff were setting tables, and reservations were packed for a profitable Friday evening. At 12:15 p.m., state compliance officers, accompanied by local law enforcement, walked into all 6 locations simultaneously. They issued immediate cease and desist orders, revoked the active health permits on the spot, and forced the managers to clear out the staff and padlock the front doors. Without an active master license holder, it was a Class 3 felony for them to serve a single meal or pour a single drop of alcohol. At 1:00 p.m., while I was peacefully feeding my daughter in my private hospital room, my phone exploded. I received 42 missed calls from Mark, 15 frantic voicemails from Richard, and a barrage of furious text messages from Alina. I ignored every single one of them. I placed my phone on silent, took a soothing shower, and waited for the inevitable storm to arrive. At 2:30 p.m., the door to my hospital room was slammed open so hard it hit the wall with a deafening bang. Richard Voss marched into the room, his face purple with rage, his suit jacket unbuttoned, sweating profusely. Behind him came Alina, her eyes wide with frantic panic, and Mark, looking utterly terrified and pale as a sheet. "Are you completely out of your mind?" Richard roared, pointing a trembling finger at me. "The state just padlocked the downtown location. They shut down the beach bistro. The health department is at our flagship store right now putting orange notices on the glass. What did you do, you ungrateful little bitch?" Alina rushed forward, her voice rising to a shrill, hysterical shriek. "We are losing $50,000 an hour. We have a private celebrity banquet tonight at 7. The bank just froze our main corporate account because of an active regulatory suspension. Fix this right now, Sarah." I sat calmly in my bed, holding my quiet daughter in my arms, and looked at the 3 of them. The absolute terror in their eyes was the sweetest sight I had ever witnessed. "Mark," I said, my voice completely level, "did you tell your parents why the licenses were suspended?" Richard turned his burning glare to Mark. "What is she talking about, Mark?" Mark swallowed hard, backing away toward the door, his hands trembling. I transferred the joint savings account last night like Mom told me to." "You did what?" Richard screamed, turning back to me. "It was just a personal transfer. You shut down a multi-million-dollar company over a domestic argument." "It wasn't a domestic argument, Richard," I said, leaning forward, my eyes locking onto his with cold, unrelenting authority. "It was grand larceny. Your son and your wife stole $340,000 of my personal, hard-earned money while I was in active labor. They removed my name from my own account, called me an employee, and told me I was being put on an allowance." Alina stepped forward, trying to pivot into her usual manipulative tone. "Sarah, darling, you're being emotional. That money was meant for the family business. We were going to give it back once Julian opened the new location. You can't ruin us over a misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding, Alina," I replied smoothly. "You wanted me out of the business. You got it. But you forgot one tiny detail. I don't just work for Voss Prime Hospitality **. I own the operational license. Without me, your 6 locations are nothing more than 6 very expensive, empty dining rooms with padlocks on the doors." Richard looked like he was about to have a stroke. "I will sue you for everything you have. I will have you thrown in prison for corporate sabotage." "Try it," I said, pulling a heavy manila folder from my bedside table that my attorney had delivered 20 minutes prior. I slid it across the blanket toward him. "That is an official notice of corporate audit and legal separation. Because you used stolen personal funds to capitalize a corporate account, my legal team has already filed for a full forensic audit of the entire Voss family entity." Richard's face drained of every ounce of color. The purple rage vanished, replaced by an absolute, terrifying pale white. He knew what a forensic audit meant. For years, Richard had been secretly skimming cash from the restaurants, using corporate accounts to fund Alina's luxury shopping sprees, and paying Julian a 6-figure salary for a ghost position to avoid paying federal taxes. An independent audit wouldn't just confirm their bankruptcy. It would land Richard and Alina in federal prison for corporate tax fraud. "Sarah, please," Alina gasped, her voice suddenly cracking into genuine, desperate tears. She dropped to her knees right beside my hospital bed, grabbing the edge of my blanket. "Please, don't do this. We will give the money back. We will transfer the $340,000 back to your account today. Just call the state and lift the suspension. We'll lose everything." "The money returning to my account is non-negotiable," I said coldly, looking down at her weeping face without an ounce of pity. "But the business is over. I am officially surrendering my master operational license back to the state permanently. Effective today, I resign as guarantor. It will take you at least 9 months and a full background investigation to apply for a new license, assuming you survive the tax audit." Mark stepped forward, tears streaming down his face, looking like a broken child. "Sarah, please, what about our marriage? What about our daughter?" I looked at Mark, the man who sat silently while his mother called me a freeloader, the man who stole my life savings while I was screaming in labor, and I felt nothing but utter disgust. "My attorney will serve you with divorce papers tomorrow morning, Mark," I said softly. "I am filing for full legal and physical custody of Lily, along with maximum child support. You proved last night that you are not a husband, and you are certainly not a father. You are just a parasite." "Get out of my room," I added, my voice echoing off the hospital walls. "All of you, before I have the police arrest you for extortion right here on this floor." Richard dragged his sobbing wife off the floor, and the 3 of them stumbled out of my hospital room like defeated ghosts. The door clicked shut, and absolute, beautiful peace returned to the room. The aftermath was swift and total. Unable to open their doors or fulfill their massive vendor contracts, Voss Prime Hospitality collapsed like a house of cards within 30 days. The news of the state closure and the impending tax audit leaked to their commercial creditors, who immediately foreclosed on all 6 locations. To avoid criminal prosecution for grand larceny and tax evasion, Richard and Alina were forced to liquidate their personal assets, selling their luxury estate and cars at a massive loss just to settle their back taxes and pay off their ruined vendors. They went from living in a $1 million mansion to renting a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city, completely broken and penniless. Julian, having no qualifications or work history, was forced to take an entry-level shift job at a warehouse to help his parents pay rent. Mark attempted to contest the divorce and fight for joint custody, but when my attorney presented the banking records showing he had drained our joint account while I was in the delivery room, the judge was appalled. I was granted full legal and physical custody of Lily, along with the complete return of my $340,000, plus damages. Mark was ordered to pay heavy monthly child support, stripping him of what little income he had left. 6 months later, I used my saved capital and my pristine professional reputation to launch my own independent hospitality consulting firm. Free from the toxic weight of the Voss family, my business thrived beyond anything I had ever imagined. I bought a sunlit, beautiful home near the coast, where my daughter is growing up surrounded by warmth, security, and genuine love. Looking back at that freezing night in the delivery room, I realized that their ultimate betrayal wasn't my downfall. It was the catalyst that finally forced me to realize my own worth and break free from people who only wanted to drain my life. Now I'm curious about you who are listening to my story. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have triggered the full audit and shut them down, or would you have taken your money back and walked away quietly? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to tell me the city or country you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. Thank you for watching until the very end.